Welcome everyone to the June 3rd, 2024 Brookline School Committee Finance Subcommittee. We'll start with the approval of the minutes. Diane or Betsy or someone, do you mind going to see where Susan is while we do the minutes approval? If someone can check. So we have the May 15th minutes to approve. I'll make a motion to approve. Do I have a second?
Second.
Thanks. Carolyn, how do you vote?
Yes.
Val?
Yes.
And I vote yes. Okay, and then the second item on the agenda is FY 2024 budget, financial report, and options to close the remaining gap. And I guess we will, Diane, are you going to carry this one or are we waiting for Susan?
Susan's jumping on right now. She should be
Okay.
here instantaneously.
Okay.
I guess I can get started.
Instantaneously is pretty quick. We could wait if you want.
We could wait.
Is the meeting being recorded or transcribed?
Recorded and transcribed.
Okay.
Yeah. There we go. Hi, Susan.
Hello.
We did the minutes already, so now we're up to the FY 24 budget update that I think is Diane or you and Diane.
Yeah.
Okay.
Welcome to Monday evening. So first, I do want to thank Diane and her team for doing yeoman's work on all things related to the FY 24 budget. And they've been doing all kinds of digging and research over the last really couple of months to try to identify exactly, where we are right here and right now as we close the FY 24 fiscal year. So tonight's meeting is to provide you with an update. And so Diane, I'm going to let her lead the review of the financial report that was sent to you earlier. I can certainly share my screen so that everybody can see that if that makes sense. And I'll let her walk you through the documents.
Sounds good. Thank you.
Okay.
All right. Did everybody get the documents? All right. Good. All righty.
Before you start, Diane, let's let Susan pull it up so everyone's walking along with you at the same time.
Yeah.
So I think I'd like to start with the narrative.
Okay. Just a second. Let me move to that then. Okay.
And excuse me, newbie question. If questions come up, should we wait to the end or do you want us to raise hands?
For me, I find myself confused if I get questions hurled at me all at once. So I would prefer if we do a Q&A at the end. I promise to keep my comments brief. So I'll leave plenty of time. There we go.
Can you see it? How's that?
Small, but yeah, that's better.
Okay.
All right. So last time we found ourselves in an unfortunate place in terms of overages, and I'm happy to report that we're in a much better space right now. And there's been a variety of factors that have led us to a much reduced overage projection as of this time. In the last narrative, we pointed out several hotspots, and you can see right here that I've updated our projections in each of those hotspots. And in most cases, our projections have come down as we've seen bills come in, as we've seen actual expenses finish the year. Things have changed and to our benefit. So we are in a much better position than we expected to be. Some things have gone up a little, like paraprofessional salary, and we know more about the cost overruns from last summer's programs. But in the other areas of expenses, things have come down. So overall, expenses have come down in these hotspot areas. And Susan, if you could scroll down to the next chart. So just to summarize, we have worked very hard on closing out purchase orders where we've picked up just over $200,000 off the deficit. We've been able to make a lot of headway, but not all of the headway in working on the special revenue funds, moving salaries that belong in special revenue to special revenue, moving things that belong in general fund to general fund, and generally cleaning up. There is more work to be done, but right now, the bulk of work is now, I believe, within special revenue funds. We've done all we can in terms of moving things from the general fund to special revenue funds, and that has helped us to the tune of $180,000. We were able to delay expenses to next year, things that can wait, for almost $100,000, and some expenses were denied altogether. And that was $123,000 roughly, including the trout field trip that was very much lamented. Though that was only a small piece of that. So those were the big factors that happened in a relatively short amount of time. Purchasing is closed for this fiscal year now. So we expect to see more purchase order closeouts. We hope that will continue to shrink, that we'll continue to see some savings there as we pay final bills and close things out. The salary in the general fund is still the wild card. Additional compensation, as we talked about last month, is not as clearly understood as we would like. And we will not know final numbers on that until we get to the absolute end of the year. Susan, can you scoot down to the last chart? There you go, right there. One of the things we talked about was, how we prepared the FY25 budget based on what we knew in the winter. And with our newer numbers as of the end of May, it's looking better. And I'm hopeful that transportation, which is still a sore spot, we will have a new contractor for OSS transportation. And I'm hoping that that gap will be reduced because of the new contract. So I'm keeping our fingers crossed that things are looking better for next year in terms of those really difficult areas for this year's tuition. Okay, so on that really 10,000-foot view, questions?
Can you go back, Susan, to the other file? Yeah. Can I ask a question? Can you just explain again, areas of concern was specifically the things you had flagged last time?
Yes, those are these things right here.
Okay.
Contracted services broken into two pieces, legal and professional services, professional and technical services. OSS transportation is the biggest one. We knew that was going to be a problem for the whole year. Out of district tuition, claims and settlements, which was running way over budget. Paraprofessional salaries, which seems to have been much under budgeted for this year. And extended school year and high school summer programs is an area that, from what we're discovering, once upon a time, a lot of things were budgeted in a great big bucket. And as we're trying to parse things out, figuring out exactly what each program needs to function is going to be part of our ongoing work.
So the 370, thank you, Diane. So the 371,900 is the reduction.
Improvement from what we were
Okay, from
projecting
April
in
to May. Okay.
Yep. Okay.
Val, go ahead.
Thanks. On the transportation number that you're projecting for FY25, I know that it's always a moving target, but if you took the students we had currently and projected that out for FY25, would we have enough, with the new contractor, would we have enough money in the transportation line? So would 863 cover the current student population? With the new
863 is just the increase, not the total.
Sorry. Would we have projected enough for the current student population under the new vendor?
I can't answer that. My eyes have been turned deeply to 24 at the moment, trying to figure out
Okay.
our current situation, but that's a good
Yeah.
question and certainly one that will get some attention as we go forward.
Okay, thanks.
Carolyn?
Thanks. I also have a question about the transportation, just so I can understand better how we got here, and also as Val was asking next year. So as I understand it, part of what happened this year and maybe happens every year is that kids are sort of coming in and out of different schools. And so there were unexpected costs, and correct me if I'm wrong there. And if that is the case, then in addition to ensuring obviously that we have enough budgeted for FY25, and this might have been covered before and I forgot, is there a cushion in there to account for those changes that sort of bit us this year that happened during the year?
So some of the issue with OSS transportation is, yes, students coming and going unexpectedly. But another part of it was that our soon-to-be prior vendor did not have the capacity to fulfill their contract obligations. And when that would happen, we would have to go out and find another vendor to service us. And these smaller vendors know that they have you in a situation and can charge rather exorbitant sums. And that's what was really killing us. If our contractor could have met under our contract terms, we wouldn't have seen nearly the vast increases we experienced. It was
Thank
our
you.
reliance outside the contract that really hurt us.
That was explained before, so forgive me for not remembering that detail. That makes sense.
That's okay. I'm really, I'm really hopeful with this new contractor. We made it really clear through the whole process. They must meet our capacity. That, that we cannot and shall not be going out looking for outside people. That they're going to be transporting our kids at the agreed upon rates, and they will find the vehicles to make it happen.
Just one follow-up on that before we go to you, Helen. We had talked about whether contractually we could have some sort of enforcement clause or penalty clause to ensure that we aren't incurring the increase if they can't meet their contract obligations. Has there been any further investigation into what mechanisms we might have contractually, or not yet?
About to go back to 24?
No, I'm talking about for next year's vendor. Like you just said, oh, we told them they have to have the capacity. And it's all well and good for them to say that.
Sure.
But contractually, can we build in either,
that language is in there.
right,
And
but what's the penalty if they don't comply?
Well, I feel like we're in a much better position now because we have a new vendor and there was an old vendor. So in the event that the new vendor isn't measuring up, we have the capacity to go get another vendor, which has not been the case for many years. There's been no competition, which has allowed an awful lot of, shall we say, unresponsiveness from vendors. So I feel like we're much better positioned now that they both know there's somebody else in the wings. They have more incentive to step up.
But do we have a
yes,
contractual mechanism
and
to,
we have a bond. So if they fail to meet the contract, there's a performance bond.
okay, thank you. Helen?
So I have two questions. One, who is the new vendor?
RSC Transportation,
And who was the old vendor? Just
JSC Transportation to maximize confusion.
okay. And secondly, I'm looking at the tuition line here.
Mhm.
And does that mean that FY25 is a $900,000 increase or a $697,000? And do we have more kids in placements?
So we have we budgeted for 697,000 increase in the general fund portion of the tuition. There's also the circuit breaker portion of the tuition line. And yes, we do have more out of district placements.
Okay.
We had a number of students go out on extended evaluations this spring.
I
But
see.
how many of those will become permanent placements and how many will come back in district isn't clear yet.
Uh-huh. Okay. And is any of this due to increase in costs of the placements?
Oh, well, tuitions go up every year and out of district placements. I mean, that's
so part of the increase for 697 is not just new students, it's also Okay, thank you.
Carolyn?
Thanks. I'm also curious to understand a little bit of the background of the para under budgeting, which I completely understand you were, Susan and Diane, not responsible for it, but I'd like to understand that. Like, how did over $1 million worth of paras get hired that weren't budgeted for?
Well, we didn't have a position control mechanism in place.
Okay.
And, you wouldn't think it's hard to keep track of bodies, but it's really hard to keep track of bodies. And, in the day-to-day hurly-burly, without a really strong system we don't have anybody unless they've got a budgeted chair to sit in, it's really easy.
Understood. Okay, that makes sense. Big
I think
system.
the other part of it too is that there was a lot of unusual changes that took place last year. Because you had an override, you added a bucket of money to support the budget. And then you also had a commitment to reducing the budget by 1.85 million. And so there was a lot of movement that was happening. And without position control, it was kind of the perfect storm. So without being able to make a strong connection between bodies and budget, which is what position control enables you to do, things kind of got lost in the shuffle. So a big piece of the work this year has been to create the staffing roster, which really underpins and makes the connection between your educational plan, the staff that you have, and the connection to the budget and programs. So we feel really good about the work that we've done so that we'll be in far better shape. And in fact, without that work, you couldn't implement a position control system. And so we're in really good shape for the upcoming year. There's a couple of areas that we're still a little vague in, and that is this extra compensation or additional assignment piece that that we really had no good documentation to that underpin the budget numbers for FY24. So as we close this year and as we've gone through the last several months, we've been going through you can't even imagine how much documentation we pour through in order to create a skeleton or a framework for each of these different forms of extra compensation. Some of it I was able to catch before we presented the FY25 budget. So one of the tasks that I underwent is to go through the CBAs and to read through them, and any extra form of compensation that was identified and connected to a position, I was able to capture a lot of that. So that would be like longevity, and you have vacation buyback, and you have sick leave bonuses. So things like that, I was able to see, read, and then assign a dollar value to in the FY25 budget. The things that we really couldn't see or didn't have good documentation on were all the other kinds of stipends for advisors, summer school programs, calculus project, all of that. In fact, some of them Diane we weren't even aware of them. So some of it's become, what is calculus project? That's something that's like Brookline specific. It's not something that all school districts have. So some of it has been really a learning journey for us to learn about programs or start to see expenses and trying to make sense of what we're seeing. So that piece will capture and wrap up this summer, and then we'll be able to say what the impact will be on the FY25 budget. I mean, the good news is that we do have a little bit of capacity because the budget was approved at 209,000 over what the school board's approved budget was, and we intentionally did not look to restore any expenses because we became abundantly aware during the FY25 budget process that we had some of these challenges that we weren't able to fully capture. So we feel pretty good about many aspects of it. The transportation, as so what did we do? We we went out to bid so that we'd have guardrails on our transportation moving forward. On the tuition, we're kind of right sizing and adjusting. Last year or in the current year, there was a 14% increase in tuitions rates across the state. And so I think some of the adjustments in special education tuition maybe weren't fully captured. And then the claims and settlements, if you look at how you ended in 23, you'll notice that it was, let's say, 750, 800,000, and then the budget for 24 was 250,000. But in reality, it's about 700,000. So it looks like it was just underfunded in the current year. We don't have any explanation if if there's assumptions that were made at the time based on what folks were seeing prior to our arrival, but we feel like maybe we didn't capture all of the claims and settlements for next year, but with 236,000, we're certainly much closer. And hopefully the claims and settlements will start to wane because there's not a backlog of those, as the deputy superintendent, when she came in, had a significant number of these that were outstanding for many years. So perhaps we'll start to see that trend back down a little bit in the upcoming year. So hopefully that gives you a little more context on kind of our journey through and some of the actions we've taken to try to mitigate and or stop some hemorrhaging moving forward.
So do you want to keep going down a little bit to actually I think it's up, sorry, because we're in the 25 section now, right?
Yep.
Yeah, so right there, that table, the 700, no, not that one, sorry, this one, the next page. Right, so to summarize, it's about almost exactly $1 million less than it was when we were meeting on May 15th.
Yes.
Okay. And do you want to talk about the steps that are listed here?
I just went through the chart, but all of this, it's all in a narrative form.
Well, I meant like 5 and 6 about what you're requesting from school committee.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that part.
We could do that now.
Yeah.
We would ask for the indulgence of the school committee to increase the amount of the circuit breaker budget to match the revenue collected in FY23, which was $3,475,572. And this has already been approved by the acting town comptroller. One of the documents you have is a request for action.
Don't switch to it yet, Susan, just stay where we are for now. Thank you. So can you just explain what the impact of this is? Because was that 318,000 bookmarked for expenditure in FY25, and now we would be using an FY. So why wouldn't we have done this already?
Because the cash flow and the budgeting and the circuit breaker was a mess, and it took a while to dig through it and get to a clear place.
Okay. So
the
even
other
if nothing else was happening, we should be doing this anyway. This is something that we should be.
Correct.
If we had the authorization from the state for that amount, we should have been claiming that anyway, correct?
Correct.
Okay.
And some of this was influenced by the fact that the town was unable to reconcile their cash until February. So
Their FY23 cash.
correct.
Okay.
And so some of these are as a result of receipts that came in that got posted late. And as Diane said, as we went through and we wrote as part of our action plan that we go through each of these revolving funds and try to, again, reconcile back to the beginning balances, as well as make sure that every staff member who is supposed to be allocated to a special revenue fund was in fact properly allocated and recorded in Munis, because a lot of the cleanup is in Munis that needs to happen. And then on the encumbrance and the PO side, making sure that we were right sizing the POs, and any additional expenses that we would see before the end of this fiscal year were encumbered properly. So that was just part of the work. In the future, the town's caught up on reconciliation of their cash, and they're doing it monthly now. Again, some of these were really circumstantial. Normally, you wouldn't be in February reconciling your cash back to June, and making sure that all receipts were accounted for and posted in the prior fiscal year. So some of this is late coming to us. And so, people say, well, what is the timeline of discovery? Some of this, has come late to us. And once that work is done on the town side, then we have to look at that and make sense of it for our side. So this was not money that we counted on for the upcoming fiscal year. So it will not create a structural deficit in FY25 by taking this action to move forward with this recommendation.
So in that case, assuming that Finance and then full school committee votes this, it would reduce the deficit, projected deficit, to a little bit under 400,000, and then you'll keep chipping away at it. And if you can't close it, as step 6 says, then we would request a reserve fund transfer for the small amount that is left.
Yes.
Hey, Susan or Diane, can you just, for general context, because this is FY23 money, can you give the broad context or just a bird's eye overview of that reconciliation process and how it's helping us now?
Well, the Department of Elementary and Secondary Education recommends that with Circuit Breaker, you collect the money. I mean, Circuit Breaker is a reimbursement program. So you spent the money in FY22, the reimbursement comes in FY23, and best practice suggests that you budget and spend it in FY24. So it's really expenses in 22, collection in 23, re-expenditure in 24. It's a 3-year loop on Circuit Breaker. Now, you are not obligated to do that best practice. You can spend the money as fast as you collect it. But to be best practice, you want to get into that 3-year cycle. And looking back through the cash and the Circuit Breaker, that has not always been the practice in Brookline, as it isn't in most districts. You get into hard times, and sometimes you have to eat into the current year revenues just to stay afloat.
Thank you.
And just to emphasize, it's the reserve fund transfer. And if for some reason that is not approved, then you would pull from special revenue sources that were intended for FY25, but you would close the gap with FY24. Okay.
That's cool.
Val, I think your hand is the first one up.
Thanks. I just had a question on circuit breaker funds generally. We could spend those in FY25, right? If we were not in this crunch, we could carry those over.
No,
that
you're
accurate?
not supposed to carry them for multiple years.
Oh, okay. Thanks.
Helen, is your hand next? I think it is.
Yes, I think so. Actually, now I have 2 questions. The not supposed to carry them for multiple years. I thought you could carry it over for a year or so.
1 year. So, using my first example, your expenses from 22 are
Right.
reimbursed in 23, and you can wait and spend it in 24, but you're not supposed to carry that money indefinitely. You're supposed to
Right.
spend
You could then carry the following year's money. You could
Yes.
use that money, carry the following.
Right.
And that's sort of what we've had in the past, if I remember correctly. We've usually had a buffer there, so to speak. So I'm surprised that we're going to be emptying it totally.
We won't be. We're not spending the money that's coming in this year.
Okay, all right.
This is
I
20.
mean, but it doesn't come in till the fall.
No, the 24 revenue is coming in. We've collected 3/4 of it already.
I get it. Okay,
And that's what's being budgeted for 25.
okay. All right. The second question I have, this 318,000 that was from prior year's expenses, is that what I'm understanding?
No,
So what is,
that's the amount of purchase orders for special ed tuition that will migrate from the general fund to the circuit breaker after that budgetary increase, because the revenues will be approved And so those expenses can come off the general fund and go to circuit breaker. And that'll reduce our deficit.
I
In
see.
some way, Helen, it is prior year because it was prior year special education expenses that
that
we got
generated the
reimbursed
revenue.
for,
Well-
that went to circuit breaker and now we can spend it on other
But they're
things.
current
Okay,
year
but-
expenses.
Right.
But we
Well, they-
also gave money back last year to the town. Why couldn't we use those monies to pay off these expenses?
Well, the money we gave back to the town, we gave it back to the town. We didn't do a special ed reserve fund. That's a special vote of town meeting to create a special ed stabilization account.
Which is something we have discussed earlier in the year and maybe something we should consider, but we don't have it now and our special funds all need to be approved. So we can't do it right now.
Okay,
Carolyn,
Thanks. Without going into too much detail, but if you wouldn't mind indulging me again, because I'm new. If you could just tell me a few examples of the kinds of salaries that are in special or paid by special revenue funds. And I'm assuming that if you're moving those around in a way that's working for us this year, that's a sustainable.
Sure. Do you want me to answer that one?
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, so one of the things that we've done in FY24 is identify by funding source the staff that should be assigned to those funding sources. So for example, Metco. When the Metco grant is written, there's certain positions that are listed that are supposed to be funded out of the Metco grant. So that was part of the work that we engaged in this year, is to go through each grant and say, these are the positions that are not supposed to be coming out of the operating budget, but in fact, out of this special revenue fund. IDEA is another one. You know, a good chunk of our special education staff are supposed to be charged off to that. So it's going through each grant and saying these positions were supposed to be. Now we have to make sure that Munis is set up to charge them properly. And that's the work we have been doing all year long, is trying to, one, identify the funding source, go through and say, this is an operating expense, this is a special revenue expense. And then once we have it mapped out, because you make your map first, and then you go back and you make your adjustments to reconcile to the map. And that's the work that we've done. So we had to create the map first, and then the rest of this year, and Diane's work this year has been trying to untangle Munis so that when we're doing financial reports, we get clean data. And so we've been cleaning and cleaning and cleaning. Because I was able to do a lot of that work in FY24, when I rolled the plan for FY25, I'd captured that. So the same staff that are going to be allocated to special revenue funds this year that we're doing the cleanup to are in fact set up properly for FY25 to start.
And
So
those
it's
are perennial funds. They're not gonna go away.
correct.
Okay,
Yeah.
amazing. Thank you so much.
Yep.
just some examples of those are like, for example, the food services staff are charged to food services, BEEP general education are charged to the BEEP revolving fund. Those are just a couple of examples. So there are sometimes special grants which have people sort of uniquely charged them, but mostly, as they say, it's sort of perennial things happening. I think, let me see. So do we want to toggle over to the motion now that, and actually, let me just put a call if there's any other questions from anybody else on any of this, our advisory colleagues or anybody else.
Yeah, can I ask a question? Perry.
Go ahead, Perry. Yep.
Perry Grossman on the advisory committee, school subcommittee, and town meeting member in precinct 5. So I guess, I think you, in the administration there were disappointed and stunned to find a lot of this stuff. Can you talk about documentation that you had in the past from past and what you're planning for the future so this sort of thing doesn't happen again?
Well, some of the work that we have, been engaged in this year is to, first of all, create this documentation, which is the roster, which is a significant control document. And then it's, position control system. So we have established a position control system with numbers for every single position that was approved in the FY25 budget. So that's a whole body of work that was done. And now, unless a requisition comes to me with a position control number that has an open slot, in other words, nobody's sitting in that seat, then I don't move forward with posting the position. And so in order to be able to keep all of our systems up to date, when people terminate or separate from us, then there's a personal action form that gets completed. That information then gets submitted to me. I update the roster. I approve all the changes, and then the seat is then vacated. So that when I get a posting that comes forward, I can look. I can say this posting can go through. I approve it. It goes up, and then we're able to hire. When the hiring happens, it's assigned to that position control number. I fill the seat, and we close the loop. That information then gets sent to payroll, and throughout Munis, once we get to the summer, we'll be updating all of the backside stuff in Munis so that the information in our plan attached to each position control number is identical in the Munis system. So our accounting system matches the roster, which matches our CBAs now. So it's a significant amount of work, but it should clarify in the long run. They'll probably create a little bit of confusion as we make this change to this new way of doing business. So position control numbers, personal action forms is how you manage your staffing, your salary budget, and your FTEs. So that's the documentation. As far as the non-salary side, of course, writing SOPs for contracts and POs and how to manage your PO system and doing a lot of training. We have all of that planned. Some of that we've implemented already and have been working with staff all year to try to increase their skill set in that area. There's still areas that don't, we haven't been able to get everything tied up in a nice bow, but the most significant one is salaries because it represents 83% of our budget. So.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Perry. Okay, so there's a motion that is being requested, and that is, I'll read the one, I can't read your small one on the screen, but I can read it on my screen, and it is to move that school committee accepts or I'll put it this way, the motion is Finance Subcommittee recommending that school committee accepts the modification of the FY24 circuit breaker fund budget amount from $3,156,936 to $3,475,572 to match the entire amount of revenue collected in FY23. This change has been approved by the town acting comptroller, Michelle Tejeda. So I guess I will make that motion. Who just seconded?
I did,
Val?
Val.
Okay. Carolyn, how do you vote?
Yes.
Val?
Yes.
And I vote yes. Okay. Anything else that we need to cover under the FY24 item, or can we move ahead to the enrollment in sections?
Thank
That's
you,
it, right,
Diane.
Susan?
Yep.
Okay, thanks. Yeah, thanks, Diane. Thanks for all this work. It's really positive, such a positive change from our last meeting, and it represents a huge amount of work on your end to tie it all together and find opportunities for savings. So thank you. Okay, FY25 enrollment in sections.
Just give me 1 second here.
Oh, I think Betsy has it up.
Oh, she does?
Yep.
Okay.
Thanks, Betsy.
I'll let Betsy drive this one.
Is this the one you want to start with, Susan?
Yeah, that'd be great. So, as you know, in kindergarten enrollment was underway this spring, and so the registration and enrollment staff have been vigorously registering and updating all of the information on enrollment. And I took the information from them today and updated the FY25 projected enrollment for each of our elementary schools. So the first line is going to be the latest information. It's of course incomplete, and I want to say that because if you remember our prior enrollment presentations, there's a chart that we call the churn chart, and it talks about from the time school ends at the end of the year throughout the summer months until the end of September, there's an awful lot of in and out shifts that occur, especially here in Brookline, more so than in most school districts. And so these numbers are not going to be the final numbers, but as we come to the close of this year, this is what the numbers are looking like right now. So this first line in each school is the FY25 projected enrollment. The second number are the number of classes that we approved in the FY25 budget. The number beneath that is the average class size based on that number. And as you can see, if we're looking at Baker, that with 4 sections, the kindergarten would have an average class size of 11.8. The number beneath that is the guidelines. So kindergarten through grade 2, the guideline is 22. And in grades 3 through 8, the guideline is 25 students. And so the line below that, if collapsed, and what that means is if we reduced by 1 section, what would the class size then be? So if we reduce from 4 to 3 in the kindergarten, then the class size would be 16 in the kindergarten at Baker. And so that's how you read the chart. What I did is I highlighted anything in yellow at this moment means that if we collapsed, we would still be within guideline. So as you're peering through this data, I've just tried to highlight for you where we're running light in some of our grades at the school level. So there's 2 there at Baker. Driscoll, there's no, the way things look right now, there's no opportunity to collapse. If we collapsed any, they would be well over the guidelines. At the Hayes School.
Dr. Gibbons?
Yeah.
Just for clarity here, I think it's important to note that especially for our kindergarten, the summer months are the high enrollment and registration, is the registration time for them. So I don't want folks to get overly excited about what we're seeing, especially for kinder at this time. And what we know about our registration process in Brookline is that September is the time that for folks that are leasing or renting, that's the target month for those leases. And in order for someone to actually enroll, they need to have a signed lease with us there. So, and that's of course, the one group that we don't have a rollover cohort that feeds. So that kinder tends to be our biggest wild card when we're looking at enrollment at this particular juncture. That doesn't change what you described there, but I just wanted that context out there.
Thank you.
And can I add to that?
Susan, are you done with scrolling through? Do you want to look at all of it before we start taking questions and stuff?
Yeah, I don't think it'll take me long. If you'd like to just complete the quick look at each school, then happy to answer questions that people may have.
Well, I think before we get to the general questions, the big question is, does this new data change the previous decisions on sectioning that have been made?
In one case, it does. So at the Pierce School, at the kindergarten level, we have reduced 1 section there. As you can see, it was already low in our original projection. And so we have reduced it to 3, which would mean you'd have average class size of 15, which is still very attractive. Again, when we look at Driscoll and Lincoln, those are the 2 schools I believe that are bordering schools. There's capacity in those schools, so we felt that between the three of those in combination, that reducing one section between those three areas was reasonable. Also, so we reduced there and we added one section at the Hayes School in the 4th grade. If you remember, which would bring the average class size in the 4th grade at Hayes down to 16. Which was the
So it's not
one-
shown here now, but it will be, there will
correct.
be a third section there.
Yeah. So I highlighted that here and made that little footnote about adding one section to grade 4 at the Hayes School. So other than that, there's been no decisions made as far as making any further adjustments in terms of collapsing, because as Dr. Guillory mentioned, there's still a whole lot of change that will happen, but we just felt with the capacity in the 2 other schools that and the capacity still remaining at Pierce, that there would be sufficient space in the kindergarten in that general area to be able to accommodate the needs that may present themselves to us as we get through the summer months.
It's my recollection that Pierce actually touches 5 other schools.
Do they?
Yeah, so there's even more capacity to send out if needed. Helen.
Yeah, I think I just wanted to add to what Susan and Dr. Guillory were saying. In addition to the kindergarten and summer enrollment, we know that certain schools always enroll in the summer, such as Ridley and Baker, that they have a lot of rental properties there, and that's where, you know, the numbers will go up substantially, as opposed to, let's say, Hayes or Runkle, which are much more consistent in terms of their turnover, not as high. So that's one of the things to continue to factor into these numbers now at this time in May, when some people don't even know they're going to be in Brookline in the fall, or like Dr. Guillory said, they haven't, even if they know, they can't they can't enroll until they have a signed lease and are living here. I think it's both, but
I think you need a utility bill or something too.
yeah.
Yeah. I think next was Carolyn.
Thanks. I have 2 questions. One is, do these numbers encompass what families have been being asked to fill out in Aspen, their plans for next year? So I heard you say, Susan, that this reflects obviously what you know about incoming K at this point, but do these grade level numbers capture what's been captured by Aspen so far? Okay,
Yes.
thank you. And then the Pierce, is the reduction and the numbers shown, does that assume buffer zone assignments that have been made, if that makes sense?
Yeah, so
So
any
you've had
requests,
requests and you've made the assignments, and that's encompassed in this. Thank
Yes.
you. Perfect. Thank you.
Helen, that's an old hand, right? Yeah, okay, Stephen.
Thanks. Just a clarification, the data presented here, the FY projected average class size, that's old data, right? That's nothing, that hasn't been updated for this presentation, right?
it has.
It has.
It has, because it's just a formula. So when I updated the FY25 projected enrollment, the class sizes I haven't updated, but the enrollment number as we see them right now has been updated. And so the average class size should just simply be the number of classes divided into the total enrollment.
Okay.
Yeah.
So Andy suggested that this was the appropriate place for a discussion on class sizes.
It's not going to be at this meeting. I actually
Okay.
have it docketed for the policy for the end of the month. I mean,
Okay.
feel free to, if you want to talk about it, but no one's seen the guidelines in it, and there's a document that goes with it.
I'm happy to be patient.
Okay. Susan, can I ask a question about, like, for example, the third grade at Pierce right now, if we take these numbers, it's projected at 15.8. And if we were to collapse, it would be at 21. So Pierce is at 50, well, I'll say 16 students, but like, and I don't know how, I haven't gotten the chance to look at all this, just Pierce is on the screen and I see a lot of yellow there. And I guess I'm wondering how we're making decisions around this, given some of the other areas in the district where there's been a lot of communication about class size.
Well, I think right now, given the amount of changes that have historically occurred over the summer months, we're not really in a position right now to be able to really make a lot of adjustments globally. The Pierce in Pierce and some of these other areas, there has been a lot of shifting in all the numbers. It's not just kindergarten, with folks moving out of the community, others moving in, not being able to register until later in the summer. So we're not at a place where we feel that it makes sense to make further adjustments until we get closer to the opening of the school year.
I get that, but also I feel like these numbers are really low and there's other places that are much higher. And given what we've said too about Pierce touching so many other districts, and that's been very helpful over time to be able both for Pierce to absorb and in this case for Pierce to send out. And so I guess I just really wonder, like, I don't think a lot of people, given that Pierce is going to be in swing space, are going to be clamoring to be in Pierce. In 4 years, we'll be in a very different situation with Pierce, but I don't think Pierce is going to be a destination location necessarily for people this year. And so, like, I really wonder about clinging to some of these low numbers, given what we know elsewhere in the district. And I mean, we had similar conversations back in January and February about the Pierce kindergarten. And
Yep.
right, and then now we're finally making a decision. I'm just I'm hoping that we can have a little bit more. I don't want to wait until it's too late for people to really be able to make their own decisions about what's happening. But I've said my piece. Carolyn, go ahead. You're on mute still, if you're talking.
Thank you.
Mhm.
Susan, would you please just scroll so we can see the haze, because that's where we've really been hearing from a lot of concerned families. And I notice, so this chart is different than the one we had in the initial budget book, which showed hotspots that would be too high. This one's showing the too low.
Mhm.
And this does encompass what we know so far. So I believe the concern at Hayes is the rising third. So the second going into third.
Right, which is the one to the left of the one being highlighted. That's 4th grade. It should be 3rd grade, Betsy. That one.
So we know there are at least 47 confirmed 3rd graders for FY25.
I believe it's rising fourth, Carolyn.
It's both. I thought the parents are reaching out to us about rising 3rd, but this is about
Correct.
rising 4th.
Yeah, it's 2 go 3.
Yeah. So I feel like the 3rd grade parents have been communicating to us, but this
Right.
chart is showing that 4th grade is the rising 3rd grade parents who are current 2nd grade parents have been communicating with us, but this
Yeah.
chart is showing the rising 4th grade parents, or the rising 4th grade is the problem spot, which now has been addressed by flopping
right
the K from Pierce to the 4th at Hayes, right?
So I just would love to give a little bit of airtime to this Hayes issue, which I sympathize and find a valid concern, and we've heard a lot of well-reasoned concerns. So this is showing 23.5, which is sort of a funny number. Let's call it 24. because we know there's going to be at least, this is, so FY20, okay. So isn't it 48 confirmed at Hayes right now? For third grade next year?
No, it's 47.
Okay, I thought I saw 48 somewhere else.
Could
but-
be the current third grade, which in this analysis is the upcoming fourth
Oh,
grade.
yeah, maybe.
Maybe that's, yeah.
So, yeah, I mean, I just would be more comfortable having this discussion and acknowledging, and I'm looking at the attendees list, and I'm seeing a lot of Hayes parents there. So, I just would love to sort of air that. And I hear you saying, Susan, decisions aren't being made. But I guess I'll just say for the record, I think this is, I think we know that the community wants to see the district investing in classrooms. We know how important student teacher ratio is. It's like the most fundamental thing. We passed an override last year, and I think the fair expectation of voters and the community was that reasonable class sizes would be maintained when people supported that override. So I think it's an important issue, and I understand there's a guideline, not a policy, but I hope we'll continue to air that. Thanks.
Val?
Thanks. Susan, I don't know if you can answer this, or Dr. Guillory, if you can answer this. Do we know what the classroom capacity is at Fisher Hill? So I'm just going back to what Mariah was asking. I want to make sure that is the guideline the same based on the classroom layout?
Well, the third grade is going to Old Lincoln, not.
No, I'm
Fisher.
talking about the upper grades. It looked like 8th grade was also very small.
You mean the square footage size, Val?
Right, like how many students can we fit in the classrooms that have been configured there?
Go to that, Betsy, please, to Pierce real quick.
You're talking about like the 8th grade, which is at 14.8 right now.
Yes.
Yeah.
But the guidelines aren't based on square footage, are they?
Well, the new guidelines incorporate the ones that we haven't discussed yet, but the point is you can't put 26 kids in a class if 26 kids don't fit in the space. So, there's the reality of what can actually fit as opposed to how many kids can be taught.
Right, so before I ask about collapsing 8th grade, I wanted to understand what the size, if we had any size constraints.
Well, I'll go back to Jamie on that, because I know she's toured it quite extensively, looking at which rooms will actually be utilized for class spaces, for gen ed classrooms there, as well as the various specials. But I'll take that question back to her.
I just don't see a place where we're getting a lot of 8th graders who are transferring into Pierce 8th grade. So it seems to me if we're looking at consolidation, that might be something to look at.
Well, and for 8th grade, for middle school, we have to remember certifications matter there as well. So looking at that 8th grade number is different than looking at, the K through 5 range, where you have a single teacher that's teaching all subjects versus your single subject certifications.
I'm confused, Linus. How would that affect it?
Well, I mean, just in terms of when you're talking about potentially reducing an 8th grade teacher there, I would have to just look at Jamie's, how she has the master schedule configured of who's teaching what, to see what impact that may have on it.
I see. Okay. Stephen.
Thanks. I was confused by your comment, Mariah, after saying that the topic of guidelines was docketed for a future session. What's docketed for a future session?
So class size guidelines is not written down anywhere. I mean, it's alluded to in certain documents, but it doesn't appear anywhere. And so we've talked several times over the past year about writing it down and then contextualizing that those numbers aren't set in stone, that there's other factors that come into play, like number of students on an IEP or 504, space of the classroom. I can't remember the other things, but there are sort of other factors. And so it's Andy asked that it be docketed through finance because there's a financial component to all of this. And so that's what's at the end of the month.
Oh, so the specific topic of what the guidelines should be.
Exactly. Because I
Okay.
mean, class size sort of drives the whole budget, right?
I
So,
see.
and these
So
kinds
then
of
I
things.
do want
Yeah.
to say something. Looking over those, thanks, Susan, for preparing this. I want to ask if, rather than make all the decisions with reference to guidelines, if you also consider making some decisions with reference to equity. It looks like not just in this version, but in previous versions, those two Hayes classes and the FRR class are outliers, especially those two Hayes classes. They're at 24. There's no other sections are at 24. The FR is at 23. Everything else is at 22 and lower. Is that ever a factor when you're looking at, I know it's still early in the game. I'm not saying that a decision point has arrived, but I'm wondering if that's a consideration rather than just always referencing guidelines and making decisions, but just looking to come to a balance. And the reason I'm asking that is because the more I look into the literature around teacher-student ratios and class sizes, the more it seems to me that thresholds are entirely arbitrary and that there is never going to be any kind of reasonable guideline that we can come to. It's just going to be about cost. So it looks to me like other metrics are going to be helpful in guiding us.
Thanks, Stephen. Susan, do you want to respond to that or Linus or no?
I haven't been part of the conversation on collapsing sections here in Brookline, so I feel like I don't have anything to really share about, what factors are considered when the collapsing happens. I would, in my read of the data, I concur with what Stephen said. I mean, the after making this adjustment for the Hayes fourth grade, which will then bring them down to 16, then of all the elementary classes as they sit right now, the next highest class would be the third grade. But if a number of those families move out of Hayes, then that number goes down. So that, that's the tricky part about making decisions at this point in time. I can say in my experience, which is primarily secondary, we would have a better sense of that at the middle school and the high school level than we would at the elementary level, because there seems to be less. As Dr. Guillory said, it's a different scheduling mechanism when you get into secondary education than elementary. But I really can't speak to it, Mariah. I don't know how those decisions were made in the past. Maybe Dr. Guillory can speak to that.
Linus, do you want to comment?
So I think the big takeaway here is wherever the moment at which you capture the data, that's where it can be either positive for one school or grade level, or if you look at it on the other end, negative for that particular grade level. So we're constantly looking at it. I think the biggest consideration is that we're staying in constant communication with the school leader when a section or a cohort is getting what we say is running hot, or if we're looking at projecting, we're saying, okay, there may be an opportunity to condense in the year ahead, looking at what may happen in a particular cohort. So I think the biggest factor here for me is looking across, working with the school leader on each of these particular cases. Now, the administration is happy to build to whatever parameters are set in place, but recognize that we can't look at this through a single, we can't take a narrow view of this. We have to take a wide angle lens approach to this. Because if you narrow in or drill down too deep, you're going to miss the broader landscape. Because the minute, and when we start getting these class sizes around 16 or so, when they start dipping like this in a particular cohort, then you're going to have folks on the other side of town that says, hey, look, I'm at 19, I'm at 20, I want to be down at 16 as such. It doesn't, I'm not saying that's good or bad or different. I'm just saying that it's good or bad. I'm just saying that it's different, and we should be prepared for that across the organization. Now, one thing Susan is talking about as we are looking to build a budget for the next round of budgets, while we also say what can we still true up in this particular cycle, but as we start looking ahead to 26, is making sure that we have contingency within our build, so that if we have to add a section, we have the capacity to do that. Or if we need to move a unit, I think as Mariah and Val were saying earlier, if we need to move a unit from another school, at what point do we start making those decisions or determinations as well? But I think we are still very early in our churn process right now. But then I also get the need to bring resolution for families, students that may be experiencing duress, given a change that's been imposed.
Stephen, is that an old hand? Thank you, Linus. One thing I wonder about too is a lot of these decisions, like the number of sections we have sort of carries over history. And so to the extent that we are, I know you said kindergarten experiences the most fluctuation as people come in, but to the extent we are sort of setting a benchmark in kindergarten with the number of sections we have, it's more challenging at Hayes and at Baker because the geographic distance, but to the extent we can really be, and I'm sure you are, but working the buffers and such so that we don't have these minuscule classes at K that then we're just working our way back from, but they're going through the system like that. It would be really good, because then, like you say, Linus, if some people have 14 and other people have 23, it really does feel very disparate, and it can carry like that for a while. So do we have a sense of when we're going to have another report to the committee on any adjustments to sections? Is that something we might revisit, say, in mid-July or in early July?
I can talk to Megan to find out when she feels we'd have the best chance of capturing most of the adjustments that would likely take place. I don't know when that is here.
Okay.
I don't know if that's July or early August or mid-August. I don't really know.
And have the Hayes Rising fourth grade parents been told that an extra section has been added? Or is this the first time they're hearing it?
And my understanding is that ACE has probably already communicated that, because we gave him that unit, I think, maybe two or 3 weeks ago now.
Okay.
And we posted the position so that he requested, so
Okay.
I think the loop is closed, but I wouldn't have contacted the families. That would have been the principal, so.
Okay.
Yeah.
Is it possible to just confirm with ASA that that's happened?
Yeah.
Okay. Any other, oh, Carolyn, I see your hands up. Go ahead.
Thanks. And I'm a little hesitant to say this, and it's probably better for policy, but just I just want to confirm that the number for the Hayes second rising to third is at this point a confirmed number, as I understand it. So it's only going to go up. It's highly unlikely to go down, it sounds like, but correct me if I'm wrong. And just as a parent perspective, you know, I've had kids in the schools for 13 years, so I've sort of had classes that were 16 once, and much bigger. if my kids were in a class that was, 20, 21, 22, that always seemed sort of reasonable, and good. So I hope that the decision making about class size and this notion of guidelines, I'm sure, is made from a pedagogical perspective and less from, if we do it this way, then people are going to complain. And I'm not sure that people do complain if there's 20, or they just feel and know that it's reasonable, but for another day.
Sounds good.
I do want to comment
go
on
ahead.
that though, Mariah, if you don't mind.
Please.
I don't know that the numbers are going to go up. I think the numbers will change. And the reason why I say that is that when we looked at this data in March at Hayes School in particular, both the 3rd and the 4th grade were at 51. And now they're lower. So it's not that they always, that the shifts in enrollment are increases.
I didn't say
Rather-
that. I just said that the
Yeah.
current number is confirmed.
Yes, the current numbers are confirmed, but it doesn't mean they're just going to go up. That was all I wanted to make sure everybody was clear on.
Yeah, people leave all the time, right?
Yeah.
Jesse, go ahead.
Yeah, just to follow up on that, the March 14th one, that was the one I've been basing a lot of my information from, because that's what's on the website. Public Schools of Brookline had 48 for 2nd grade going into 3rd, and now you see that it went down 1 to 47. So already, like Susan said, it can just go down as well. And of course, if for some reason it was to go down a few more, your class size ratio would actually be more positive then.
Sorry, I'm just going to say that my understanding is the number here is people who have responded in Aspen for FY25. So
I understood,
those
Carolyn, to be
people will
different.
decide to move, but those
I
are
understood
people
it
who've
to be
responded.
different, Carolyn, that essentially everyone who said they weren't going to be here have been deleted, but not
Right.
that everyone here has affirmed attendance, just that the people who said they're leaving have been deleted or
Right.
reduced, right? Subtracted. Okay.
Or those that had made a request to go to another buffer zone school.
Sure.
That has been processed, yeah.
But I don't think we can ever expect 100% compliance with surveys. So
No.
no. Although I filled it in, I just want you to know. Suzanne, go ahead. And then I hope we're going to end maybe 15 minutes early on this one. Go ahead, Suzanne.
Yeah, okay, thank you. I just, when it comes to, and someone mentioned this, maybe it was Linus or Susan, really a lot of this comes from the school administrator. And so what's hard for us to know is when you look at the numbers, that's one thing. But then when you look at either programming or inclusion or whatever it is, that's English learners, those are all kind of extra considerations. And so to have a particular conversation, for instance, about Hayes, we really be helpful, but would put a lot of pressure on ASA to know what the thinking is. Because if we look at the numbers alone, and if 4th grade is going to 3 sections at 48, one would wonder why 3rd grade is not going to 3 sections at 47. And so I think it's confusing to those outside looking in, but not understanding what the considerations are.
Suzanne, I think you make a valid point there. And Jesse, if you still have that sheet up that you were looking at, what was the number for that 4th grade back then? Because I think that number, and I want to draw on that, Suzanne, because what you're talking about is exactly right. At the time, I think that number was 51 or
Right.
52.
Yeah, it's what Susan mentioned. It was 51 back in March. Yeah.
So at that moment, we made the decision to say that was the hot spot. We needed to relieve the pressure there because it exceeded the guideline at that moment. So, and again, when Susan and I looked at this and when we bring the presentation to you, I think Thursday with our attendance, you're going to see a very similar type of information depending on where you take the snapshot. You can make some very different decisions if you wait a few more days or another cycle or two. So, and we've certainly heard the the request from the parent group. I met with them, I think, last Thursday or Friday as well, and shared with them that this particular group is top on our list in terms of restoration. But again, it's looking at it across the system and seeing where can we find or pull a unit from that would make sense, so that we don't solve a problem on one side and then create an issue somewhere else. And so that's what I mean by taking a holistic approach and looking at this. And again, this is our crisis or our hotspot moment for right now, but how then do we set ourselves up so that we lower the opportunities for these types of challenges to come up? It doesn't mean that we'll never have them. Because again, Mariah and I always go back to the histogram, I think, that you and Andy worked on, I think, when we were coming up with the override projections. Yep. You said there were going to be a number of course or sections that were going to be right at guidelines, or some that were even going to be above the guidelines, and there are never going to be those outliers that are way below. And so we knew that as we were building or projecting these things out as well. So again, it's looking at that in totality versus doing a deep dive on a single particular sliver.
Well, you know, Linus, that's interesting, because at the time, what confused me was back in March, even though there were 51 students, it was still listed as 2 sections. So the average came out to 25 and a half, and I figured it would be a 25 class and a 26 class. And it was written as 2 then, and now it's written as 2, but you're saying with 3 students less, we're going to increase the number of sections. So that shows something about the dynamics over time.
Yep.
I do want to just add one thing, though, which I think is important at Hayes. Is it's my recollection that Rise at Hayes was K through 2 until last year, and this year was the 3rd grade string being added, and next year is the 4th grade string, basically as students are aging up through the program. So to the extent that the 3rd and 4th grade are also incorporating students who are Rise students and coming into the classroom, I think it is really somewhere where this is taking a holistic lens. We want to be seeing all of our students served well, and a classroom that's very large with also students with Rise who are coming in and out, and the increased dysregulation that can happen with that many other students and all of that. So I do see that there's multiple reasons to be thinking about those classrooms through a lower ratio. This isn't just a gen ed perspective, it's also a special education perspective. Any other comments on this before we wrap up for the evening? Okay, to the Hayes parents who are in the attendees, you know, I think you're hearing how seriously this is being taken by staff and by school committee. Everyone is certainly looking at the issues that you've raised and across the district. This isn't just a question of Hayes. You've heard other schools brought up as well. Everyone's looking at, you know, what can be done and balancing this, and looking at not knowing the future and trying to do the best as that can be done at any one moment. But I'm sure we'll have updates. Susan, you'll check back with Megan and see if we can get an update midsummer to see where things are at. And also check with ASA to make sure that the rising 4th grade families are aware of the increased section. Cool. Okay, everybody, thank you. Have a good night. And I think that's it for now. Bye, everybody.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.